The next piece of equipment is my Pugger. This is a Peter Pugger VPM 20 stainless steel. I went through all of the pug mills that were at NC and ruled out many of them because they weren't stainless steel. I've seen too many corroded aluminum ones. I've owned too many corroded aluminum ones that stainless steel was the only option. I had to have it. Get one that is a vacuum pug mill. You will kick yourself over and over if it's not a vacuum one. This is the largest one that Peter Pugger makes in the stainless steel. It's the 20, which I think can hold 30 pounds of clay. Not sure. I put in as much as I can. I squirt out as much as I can. The pug mill itself has a speed control. So if you were to extrude, it has a die or a face that you can put on it for dies, so you can change the speed. It's a mixing pug mill. So Peter Puggers vary a little bit than other pug mills in that it has a reverse function, so that it can spin and mix up the clay more than just a normal feed pug mill where you put it in and it squirts it out. This is a mixer pug mill, so it does a little bit of both. It's also not super loud for a studio pug mill. If I can turn it on. That's not loud at all for a pug mill. And that's just the puggy part with the vacuum. It doesn't have that much sound. Other vacuum pug mills that I had are tremendously loud. And I would actually have to wear ear protection when I was in the studio. This one, not so bad. This is my new kiln. This is a 10 cubic foot L&L. It is my first new kiln ever. I've been using a lot of used, beat up old kilns. This is my first new one. I've done one firing in it so far. So it is really brand new. I went with L&L, and I would only get an L&L. Well, there are a few reasons, but the first one are the element holders. I've used kilns side by side. I used a Scut and an L&L next to each other in the same place with the same people loading and unloading. And I will say that the Scut was beat after 5 years. So much of the damage happens in unloading and loading, people chipping bricks with the shelves and everything. These protect the really fragile parts of the brick from getting chipped. So as you're putting a shelf in, you hit these, they don't break nearly as easy as the soft brick. Also, in terms of changing elements, these elements you just pull out of the channel and you put new ones in. There's no pins, there's no soft brick to have to worry about breaking as you pull them out. The other variation that's different with an L&L over other kilns is that it's almost, I don't know if it's a mandatory thing. The bigger kilns all have zone control. So there are 3 thermocouples that control the kiln. And that means a more even firing throughout. It's not that the elements are weighted. It's not that there's a vent pulling the heat down. It's that when this thermocouple senses that the top part of the kiln is cooler, it sends a longer period of firing to the top elements. Or if the bottom is behind, it would do that for the bottom. Also means that if one thermocouple fails, you can kind of go into, in the boat world, we'd call limp mode, where you could run the whole kiln off of one thermocouple. So if for some reason, part of it failed, you could still be running. Secondly, all the thermocouples are shielded. So they have a porcelain tube. Maybe I can unhook you. Well, you get the idea. There's a porcelain tube sheathing all of the thermocouples. So they're not going to spit little bits of thermocouple all over the pots near the thermocouple. It also helps them last longer because they're not in that corrosive environment where you've got sulfur and moisture working on them. The kiln also has the lid assist. So it's a one-hand lift. It's got the clamp on it. Not all kilns have the clamp to keep the lid shut so it doesn't bow and lift up. It has an on-off switch on the controller. So rather than leaving the whole thing on the whole time or turning it off at a breaker or at a shut-off, it's got its own toggle on the controller. I could take this apart and show you how it opens up and how well it's put together on the inside in terms of changing elements and all that. But that's a whole nother video, and there are people that do that a lot better than I do. Real quick, I wanted to say that the kiln is also vented. It's important that in my small studio that I have a place to expel the gases, and it's properly adjusted so that no gases come out of the kiln. It's pulling enough that it's drawing all the air that would normally escape a poorly adjusted kiln vent. It draws it all the way outside. And the last thing in terms of major studio equipment is my computer. I do an awful lot online through Facebook and the Facebook groups to YouTube, and without my computer, I wouldn't be able to conversate and make these videos and all that I get to. Thanks, Mr. Computer. The next part of the video is going to be dealing with furniture and good things to think about when you're designing the furniture in your studio. For me, I don't have everything on wheels. That actually kind of drives me crazy. I have some things on wheels, the heavy things, the things that I need to move around because I use them in different places. But like for tables, I would never put on wheels because I don't want to move them. I want them to be stationary. I want them to be a permanent part of the studio. So this, where I have my pug mill, I made so that I can fit 2 bins stacked on top of each other on the little rolly things that fit underneath the counter. You know, a couple inches too high and it'd be hard to use the pug mill, a couple inches lower and I'd only be able to stack 1, and that would really, really bug me. So we see that they just get underneath. They got about 1.5 inches, 2 inches of clearance. I did initially make this for my wedging table, and then I got the pug mill, and it works just right. I also, to save room and everything, I need to be able to get in and out of the door, but we'll open this up here. But I wanted, I wanted to be able to get just a little bit more counter space out of that part of the counter, and from there. It's good to have shelves above counters because you don't have to worry about bumping into them and everything. So I added more shelves there. The table and stuff. So I love my table. This is a birch plywood table. Canvas is the devil. There's no way to easily clean it. This birch plywood table, I think, is 5 years old now. It's held up well. You cannot soak it in water. You can't take a sponge, soak it, put it on the middle of the table, and leave it for 3 days. It's gonna hurt the plywood. But if you don't make those kind of mistakes, then it lasts a very long time. It's 3/4 inch sanded birch plywood. You can get it at most hardware stores and everything. It's just a 2x4 frame with 4x4 legs. I will have a link to that on my Facebook page. I have the building of it, so you get an idea of the parts. I did make, when I first designed this thing, I put a little trap door so that as I was cleaning up, you know, I could just push all the things into a little bin to recycle. Never really use it. It was a good idea, not very practical though. I just didn't use it. In terms of studio table design though, I failed on this one in that the edge is flush with the frame. It's better if the surface sticks out a little bit so that when you go to brush stuff off into your hand, you can get underneath it. I didn't make that mistake on this table. This one I can get my hand underneath to scoop up all those little goodies. The height of the table too is so that buckets and everything can go underneath. If you have it too short, like if the bucket is on the ground, because I didn't have my little wheelies when I designed the table, I can put 2 buckets on top of each other. On the little wheelies, I can only fit 1. While we're over here, we've got the shelves on top of the table on the backside. It's a hard to use space, that part of the table. So I said, well, that's where I can put all my tools. So I found, you know, a cheapo little thing at a garage sale. I just stack all my tools in it. Little plastic bins work great for tools. They're easy to wash because you're not jamming them around all the place. They last for a pretty long time. My underglaze area, I can do better. I think that's one of the next studio things that I work on, is that part. I do a lot with damp boxes. I'll post a link for the video on my damp boxes, but I store them all over the place in any place I can. Right now, most of them are pretty much empty because it's the new cycle and I haven't started making parts yet, but like they're underneath, they're all over. I love my damn boxes. I mentioned it earlier, the table that goes around my wheel is the scrap from my big table. So the big table is 4x6. It was a 4x8 sheet of plywood. So those last 2 feet I turned into my L table for around the wheel. This one has a smaller frame. I mean, I don't wedge on it or anything. It is, I think it's 2x3s, something like that. It's the smaller studs. It had the scrap wood for the legs. It is pretty much just all scrap that generated it. The top surface is the plywood, but I have finished it. I've put a polyurethane coating on it because I don't need to wedge on it. I don't need it to be absorbent and all. And if I do leave a sponge on it, which I'm much more likely to do around the wheel, I wanted it to be a little more durable. And it is as old as my table, and there are points, you can see here, that, yeah, it got a little too wet there. It has some delamination, but it's not ruined. It's not like I'm working on it and that stuff is going to be affecting my pots. The next piece of studio equipment is a bread proofing cabinet. It was originally for proofing dough. So they would put dough in trays, and there would be a little heater in here that kept it the right temperature for bread. I took the heater out, I sealed up all the little holes in it, and I put weather stripping around the side. What's nice about this is that there's adjustable shelves every inch. Plywood shelves, these are 1/2 inch birch ply and then other plywood that I had around. But this is where I put all my pots as I'm working. With two boards of pots, it'll keep those wet enough to trim for about 2 to 3 weeks, depending on the weather, which is a long time, a lot of working time. If it's full, it'll pretty much hold them indefinitely. It takes a month or so to dry pieces out enough before they're like too workable. So it's got its advantages in that I don't have to worry about putting plastic over my pieces or anything, that while they're in here, they're pretty much safe. I can go a month and not trim them. If I want to trim them, I leave the cabinet open and I turn the shelves around every day or so and close it up at night. And that'll get them 2 or 3 days they're ready to trim. But saved me a lot of time and a lot of space in terms of plastic all over everything and pots on tables or shelves. This next one might be a little harder to see, but I want, you've seen the space with it not set up, that up here on these little cable-y things, and then like this back here is a fold-down table. So it is not anything that you can like wedge on. You can't pile clay on it. But in terms of a working space in which to do photography, to put another flat surface for sorting work and all, it's great. I got these little clips and Velcro on the wall here so that I can hold my backdrops, my photo backdrops, to get clipped to there, and they can get clipped or weighted on here. It saves me a lot of space. I don't have a dedicated photo area. I only shoot photographs 2 or 3 times a year, and this is a great way to have it someplace that's easy to use. I'm not throwing while I'm doing photographs, obviously. It's that kind of end of the cycle, but I can tuck it all away when I'm done, so it's completely out of the way. Studio shelves. Who doesn't love studio shelves? These are pretty common racks that you find on Craigslist or whatnot. This is it has a lot more shelves, baker rack, and this is just a lesser amount of shelves rack. They're on wheels. I move them around depending on what I'm doing. The permanent ones in the studio are, I want to say they're Gorilla shelves. And if you've ever had to set these up and move them around, you know what a nightmare that is. If you have the tiniest, faintest ability of welding, I would say do what I did and weld them together at the joint, in the middle, and at the top and bottom. So these are welded just enough to hold them together so that when I do go to move them, I can adjust this shelf and this shelf, but the bottom, top, and middle are permanent. And it makes it a whole lot easier when you go to move them. One of the things that I would do, if and I may do that this year, is replace the boards that they come with. These are really cheap particle board, and they end up warping, or just from weight. So I'm thinking about replacing them with something that's a little more, 3/4 inch ply, cheap plywood, so that it doesn't bow as much. It's not so big of a deal, except when you start stacking things up and they start leaning and it gets all. So during my, making process, I usually will put work that is drying or ready to get bisqued on these shelves, to go into the kiln, and then when they're done getting bisqued, they go back on the shelves for underglazing, staining, and glazing. So they're the works in progress sort of shelves. Top part is just stuff. There's things all over. I'm gonna move you for a second. Taking you out of the holder again. So over here, we have more shelves. So we have, normal adjustable shelves with little brackety things you can move around. More of those. This is where I end up putting finished work, things that are, already done, or in this case, my cones and stuff. The shelf that's a little different is my kiln shelf. This one was given to me. I did not build this, but it's worked really well. There's a end down here that doesn't have a table over it in which to put the kiln shelves, so they're easy to get to without having to slide them underneath a table and whatnot. And my kiln posts, I do not use a lot of kiln posts. I pretty much only use the big ones because I tumble stack most of my electric kiln firings. And that's my little L&L test kiln and that little baby kiln. He's a project kiln we're working on. On the back side here, you can see all my bats and my chucks and things, all my little plastery bits and hand tools that are bigger. So like my extruder stuff is in there, slip trailing, all those things are in those bins there. And then more miscellaneous stuff up there. Another thing is the floor. So underneath the kiln, that is concrete, and then there's a layer of, I think, 12-inch tile on it. And that's in case if there is an accident, something happens, that there's nothing flammable underneath or around the kiln. The rest of the studio, because of expense when I was building it, is cheap linoleum flooring. It's the full sheet was, I think, 12, so I was able to cover the whole floor in one sheet. I picked a contrasting color to the clay that I normally use so I can see when I'm making a mess. If you use the same color as your clay, then you're just hiding it. And if you're hiding it, then you can't fix it as easy. So I know when my studio is dirty. I know when I need to mop again. It's because it's easy to see. Would I go this route again? No, I would try to save up a little more money and go all tile because it's so much easier to clean than this stuff. Heroes in my studio is Mr. Mop. I don't know if you've seen around. I mean, it's not spick and span right now. I haven't been working in the studio in terms of making fresh new pots since October. I've been doing lots of other stuff in the studio, like making tools and things. But the reason the studio is clean is because of my mop. When I'm working, I mop every night. It's not hard to do. Have a good mop. Don't get a shitty one that's hard to use and falls apart and comes unclipped. Get one of the, not industrial, but one of the professional style mops with the heavier mop head. They have different mop heads, believe it or not. Have an easy way to fill it. That little sink over here, I didn't really get to talk about too much, has a, woo, look at that, it comes out. So you can fill your mop bucket pretty easy. This is hopefully is my health insurance, that keeping the studio clean, keeping it free of dust will let me live longer. So that's my studio. Thanks for coming around. I know this is a long video. I might put it in 2 parts. This could be part 1, part 2. Thank you guys for all your support. Watching the videos, hitting the like button, making the comments, all make my videos show up more. So I appreciate those that do those kind of things. If you haven't already, subscribe. I've got some things in the works. And as always, if you've got questions, please ask them. I'm more than happy to answer questions. That's why I do these kind of things. Being able to give back to the community is a major part of why I participate. So, if you've got questions about any of the stuff in any of the videos, but particularly in this video about setting up a studio, I'd rather be able to answer a question than making the mistakes that I have already to get to this point, because I've made a lot of them. Okay, thanks. Bye, YouTube.